Dig my new haircut? Okay, let's continue our journey of Fanchon the Cricket by George Sand, Chapter 5. For the 2 or 3 of you out there who are interested. I figure maybe like when I'm dead, all of a sudden there'll be a renewed interest in the work of George Sand, and someone will find this and realize what a great writer she was, especially for girls, which we need. Okay, enough with the proselytizing. Landry could not understand this jealousy in his brother, since jealousy was to him a passion entirely unknown. Lucky him. Therefore, when Sylvanette came to visit him at La Pliche, Landry, thinking to amuse him, took him to see the large oxen, because that's fun, the fine cows, and abundant crops of Farmer Caillot, for Landry valued all these, not from pride, but from a natural taste for agricultural labor, for the rearing of cattle, and all other matters connected with such pursuits. Thus he took pleasure in seeing the colt which he had to lead to the meadow, fat, clean, and glossy, as he could not endure that whatever was worth doing at all should be done badly, or that anything which might be turned to account should be neglected and despised, looking as he did upon everything as the gift of a good God. Sylvanette viewed all these matters with indifference, and was surprised that his brother should take so much interest in what did not concern him. He was, in fact, dissatisfied, and said to Landry, "You seem greatly taken with these large cattle, and no longer give a thought to our little oxen, so full of life and courage, and yet so gentle and affectionate to us, that they would always allow themselves to be yoked more willingly by you than by our father. You have not even asked me after our cow, which gives us such good milk, and which, poor beast, looks at me with so sad an air when I take her food, as if she understood that I was alone, and would ask me after my brother." "It is true, she is a good beast," said Landry, "but look at these. You shall see them milked, and then you will say you never in your life saw so much milk given at a time." "That may be," returned Sylvanette, "but that the milk and the cream are as good as the milk and the cream of our own brown cow, you will never get me to believe. For the grass of La Bessonnière is better than the grass here." "Indeed," said Landry, "and yet I believe my father would gladly make the exchange if he could have the fat hay of Farmer Caillot for that of his, which grows on the borders of the stream, and which is not a little injured by the rushes." "Bah!" replied Sylvanette, shrugging his shoulders, "there are in that same meadow much finer trees than all yours put together, and as for the hay, if it be not so abundant, it is finer, and as it is carried home, leaves a balmy odor wherever it passes." It's so funny that Landry is not reading the subtext at all. Kind of like a guy. Thus did the twins dispute about nothing, for Landry knew that there is no greater blessing than contentment, while Sylvanette had no special regard for his own possessions over those of La Pliche, spite of the abuse he heaped upon them. He really didn't care, in other words. But at the bottom of all this vain contention there was on the one side a lad content to work and to live, no matter where or how, and on the other an unfortunate boy who could not understand how his brother should know a moment of ease and pleasure apart from him. If Landry led him into his master's garden, and while chatting stopped to cut a dead branch from a tree or to pull up a weed from the vegetables, Sylvanette was vexed to find his brother full of his duty to others instead of being devoted to himself. He did not, however, suffer any of this feeling to appear, being inwardly ashamed to find himself so easily offended. I can relate. But at the moment of quitting Landry, he would sometimes say, "There, you have had quite enough of me for today. It may be you have had too much, and find my visits tedious." Landry could not comprehend these reproaches, yet they caused him pain, and in his turn he reproached his brother, who neither would nor could explain. If the poor child were jealous of the slightest thing which occupied Landry's attention, he was still more jealous of the persons for whom Landry evinced attachment. He could not endure that his brother should be intimate with the boys of La Friche, and when he saw him amusing or caressing the little Solange, he reproached him with forgetting his sister Nanette, who, according to him, was 1,000 times prettier and more interesting than that ugly child. But as justice is incompatible with jealousy, when Landry came to La Bessonnière, then Sylvanette thought he appeared too much engrossed with Nanette, and reproached him with paying attention to no one but her, and for his utter indifference to himself. In short, his affection became by degrees so exacting, his temper so morose, that Landry began to suffer, and to find that it was no longer for his happiness to see his brother too often. He was weary of hearing himself forever reproached for yielding so readily to his fate, by which reproaches one would have thought Sylvanette would have felt happier if he could first have rendered his brother as miserable as himself. That's reasonable. Landry understood and wished to make him understand how an affection carried to excess may sometimes become a misfortune. Sylvanette would not listen to such an argument, and even considered it a great wrong that his brother would entertain such an idea. At last he would pass whole weeks without going to La Friche, all the time dying to see Landry, but restraining himself from a false feeling of pride, where pride should never have intruded. At length it came to pass that, from words to words, from vexations to vexations, Sylvanette, always misunderstanding what Landry said to him, arrived at such a state of indignation that at times he fancied he hated the object of so much love, and one Sunday in particular quitted the house that he might not pass the day with his brother, who nevertheless had not once failed to devote the Sabbath to his service. Such childish perverseness greatly chagrined Landry. Every day growing stronger and more manly, it was natural he should love pleasure and excitement. In all games of skill he was sure to be first, the most supple of body, the quickest of eye. It was therefore no slight sacrifice he offered his brother in leaving the joyous lads of La Friche every Sunday to pass the whole day at La Bessonnière. For Sylvanette, who had remained much more of a child both in body and in mind than Landry, and who had but one idea, that of loving and being devoted entirely, desired nothing better than that his brother should repair with him alone to the haunts where they had been accustomed to amuse themselves with games no longer suitable to their age, such as making wheelbarrows of rushes and little mills, or building houses with stones, and laying out fields as large as a pocket handkerchief, which they pretended to cultivate in diverse manners, imitating the laborers whom they saw plowing, sowing, and reaping, thus teaching each other in an hour's time all the modes of cultivation and tilling which occupy the cycle of the year. These amusements were no longer to the taste of Landry, who now practiced, or assisted in practicing, the same things in reality, and who preferred driving a wagon with 6 oxen to attaching a miniature carriage to the tail of his dog. He would have preferred playing at ninepins with the big boys of the neighborhood, in which game he was an adept. But if by chance Sylvanette consented to accompany him, instead of joining in the game, he would sit in a corner and never open his lips, ready to fret and torment when Landry appeared to enter into the game with zeal and pleasure. Oh. Landry had learned to dance at La Friche, and though owing to Sylvanette's dislike to anything of the kind, the distaste for this amusement was a recent acquirement. He was already a match for those who had taken to it as soon as they knew how to walk. He was more especially esteemed as a good dancer of the bourrée at La Friche, and though yet too young to care for kissing the girls, according to the custom of this dance, he was content to follow the general example, all the more willingly as it seemed to announce his emancipation from childhood, and he would not have been displeased had the girls offered the same resistance to him as to the men. Okay. But he had not yet achieved this distinction, and even the oldest among them would catch him laughing round the neck at the risk of no small offence to his dignity. Sylvanette had once seen him dance, and it had been the cause of his greatest vexation, for he was so enraged to see him kiss one of the daughters of the farmer Caillot that he wept with jealousy, and pronounced the whole thing indecent and unchristian. Thus, while yielding his own amusements to the affection of his brother, Landry did not pass very pleasant Sabbaths. Still, he had never once absented himself, thinking that Sylvanette would appreciate the sacrifice, and lost sight of his own disappointment in the thought of giving happiness to his brother. When, therefore, he found that Sylvanette, who had been moody and quarrelsome through the week, had quitted the house that he might not see him, he, in his turn, was vexed, and for the first time since he had left his family gave way to tears, taking care, however, to conceal himself from a mingled feeling of shame and a desire to spare his parents additional grief. If either of them had a right to be jealous, it was Landry, since Sylvanette was the darling of the mother, and even Farmer Barbeau, though entertaining a secret preference for Landry, showed most indulgence and consideration for his brother. This poor lad, being the weaker and the least reasonable of the two, was also the most spoilt. At the same time, his fate was the easier inasmuch as he remained with his family, while Landry had to endure the separation and toll. For the first time, our good Landry, thus reasonable within himself, came to the conclusion that the conduct of his twin was altogether unjust. Until then, his kind heart had prevented his thinking him in the wrong, and rather than accuse him, he had condemned himself for possessing too much health and strength, and for wanting the gentle manners and disposition of his brother. But this time he could find in himself no sin against their affection. He had given up a flashing party. Oh, he's not a tranny. He had given up a fishing party with the lads of La Priche, which promised much pleasure, that he might pass the day with his twin, and at his age it is no small thing to resist such a temptation. In the midst of his weeping, he was suddenly arrested by the voice of someone near him, evidently in great distress, and talking to themselves, after the custom of country women when overwhelmed with sorrow. Landry quickly recognized the voice of his mother, and hastened to her. "Ah," said she to herself, sobbing, "why must that child cause me so much sorrow? He will be the death of me, I am sure." "Is it I, mother, who am the cause of your sorrow?" exclaimed Landry, throwing himself upon her bosom. "If it be me, punish me, but do not weep. I know not how I can have grieved you, but I beg your forgiveness all the same." At this moment the mother knew that Landry had not a hard heart, as she had often imagined. She smiled, kissed him fervently, and scarcely knowing what she said in her distress, told him it was Sylvanette of whom she complained, that it was true she had sometimes entertained a harsh thought against him, for which she now offered reparation, but that Sylvanette appeared to her to be going out of his senses, and that she was uneasy at his departing before daylight without breaking the fast. The sun was now beginning to decline, and still he did not return. He had been last seen by the side of the river, and the unhappy mother feared he might have thrown himself in to put an end to his days. Oh, that would make a mother cry, would it not? Do you like my little patches? That's because me and my granddaughter both have sweaters with these patches. Okay, bye!